in RF technology, and it's exactly the same right now that's going on with the auto industry. So I completely echo the governor's point. Be brave, be bold, invest in the technology that you know is coming for the future. Bring the jobs for your people to that technology, and you'll do well out of that boat.
Olivier?
Well, look, very quickly, there is something very interesting which is happening. We know more or less what is the recipe since 20 years. A big part is about electrification, but what was the biggest limitation was automation and digital. Take your home, which is not the topic of today. We need to invent the solution that will help all of you in this room to save 5 to 10% of your energy consumption every day. It's extremely complicated today. Some of you might have a home automation device or whatever. Some of you rent your apartment. You don't want to invest too much. If you look at what digital is bringing, and there is a lot of stuff about AI, but keep it simple. AI help you to make technology simple to use and make simple decisions. So what is really fascinating in this cycle where we are today is that the digital technology can help you to make this dream of decarbonization a reality in a very short amount of time. So when you talk about speed, what is super essential is that all large companies like us, of course, develop those technology. We make them accessible, affordable in a simple way, because I can tell you it's a big part of the answer. And that could really be a huge acceleration, again, for decarbonization. But I'm sure you will be all happy to save 5-10% of energy consumption. Even if the cost of energy is low in your country, it's still 5-10% saving every year. So that makes a lot of sense, but we just have to go much faster.
Well, let me transition to the question about sort of transformation across the value chain, so the resources we need from beginning to end to do this. And Secretary, I know that you think a lot about access to affordable renewable energy, how we expand that, particularly in countries where we may have, limited infrastructure. How are you thinking about that?
Well, you see, the thing, I wanted to raise something related to the auto industry. And that is that, for example, in Mexico, we are working very closely with the car industry altogether, because we believe that to build up timeframes on how they can quickly move into hybrid. We are thinking more on hybrid rather than electromobility, because we believe that hybrid might be more efficient. Because it's difficult to have the chargers everywhere. So, but the timing that we have been discussing together, government with industry, is 2027 to have more or less the auto industry in Mexico City, in Monterrey, and Guadalajara, at least these 3 big cities, to be ready for hybrid mobility. So I just wanted to make that point before raising the other one. Now, on energy transition, indeed, in Mexico, we have still, let's say, around 5 million people without electricity, which is not a big number, but it's a big challenge at the end of the day, because these are located in very far places. So, and many times for industry, it's not easy to get to those towns. Now, in Mexico, as you know, the electricity, for example, is a state-owned company, but it has been opened up by President Sheinbaum. 56% is going to be public, and the rest can be private investment. I think this will lower the prices quite a bit, because we need private-public alliances at the end of the day to bring down especially energy transition, especially renewables. We have a lot of places where Mexico can be very competitive in terms of solar, for example, in terms of wind or aeolic. Basically, those two, I guess, are the most attractive ones, especially on the northern part of Mexico. But the other thing we are looking for is to start moving from oil, let's say, combustóleo, I don't know how to translate that, but anyway, move to cleaner energy within the fossil fuels, within the fossil fuels themselves. And this is something we have to do. We are a country that still relies a lot on fossil fuels. So at least how do we clean up those fossil fuels a little bit more? So, and at the end of the day, what we really need is to give access to people to lower the prices, which is the most, I would say, challenging thing we still have. in a country that has so much inequalities yet in territorial terms and so forth. So that's the challenge, is of course to generate cheaper energy, no question about it, not at any cost. Of course, it should be renewable, preferably, and that's still too costly for many people.
Right.
That's the problem. Technology is not yet available, accessible as we would like it to be.
Yeah, Damilola, you were speaking to this as well, this issue of how do we make this accessible and affordable, particularly in countries where we have, challenges with that.
Yeah, I was actually putting my government hat back on because I used to run the largest energy access program on the continent in Africa, and that was the main thing. My government, Nigeria, we had spent billions on electrification, just billions, and it was only when we introduced the private sector that we started seeing speed and scale. So we managed to connect 8 million people in about 8 to 9 months, which government subsidies. So it was still government money, but they were subsidizing in the right way. And then the private sector, we created the regulations, and that's what I mean by time, because government also has to move to the speed of the private sector sometimes. Regulation, unfortunately, I can't believe I'm saying this from the UN, sometimes slows down innovation, sometimes. But back to what we were saying, and that is why as we really push forward, and we know Schneider is very big in Africa, we cannot leave a certain set of people behind. I'll give you a very, very practical thing, and I'm not going to mention the country. We were trying to convince a country in Africa to buy 100 EV buses. I was really excited. They did it, instead of the alternative, and it came, and then we realized that there was no framework to register an EV bus in the entire country. Right? And there was no standards on the charging and the batteries for EV buses. And this is not an uncommon thing, right? So while, yes, you might not set up tomorrow in some of these countries, we do have to get ready for that time, unless some countries would just become a dumping ground for obsolete technology.
Right.
We saw that with refrigeration and other appliances. It can happen, and it is happening. So that is what I mean by the fact that let's get ahead of things with policies, with regulations, but that work for the localities, that you're in. Well, I mean, we all know at least two-wheelers are the most cost-effective electric compared to petrol. We know that. But the infrastructure, a lot of people don't want to invest and build all the cables. And then, we're talking about infrastructure of grids. There's some places there's no grid. So you're not going to just nicely connect into a transmission network that doesn't exist. So it's all these things, and governments really, really need to commit, but alongside listening to the private sector, instead of make all your plans, and then you bring the private sector for some stakeholder consultation. It doesn't really work like this. This is an area the collaboration really, really matters.
Right. I mean, every time we say the word infrastructure, it's a proxy for government, right? So you need to be aware of what we're talking about. Jim, you've been really focused on grid stability and energy access, et cetera. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, just to pivot maybe as well on the early comment on hybrids. Hybrids is a fantastic bridge technology because it gets people used to electrification. We have all the data for every hybrid. And by the way, we sell as many hybrid cars as we do full electric cars, because a lot of people on the planet, either through no fault of their own, they don't have the infrastructure that they can rely on. So what we find is from the data that we have that every single mile or kilometre that's driven in a hybrid car is electric, 50% already. Because even if it's only got 80 or 100 kilometre range, most people don't drive that in a day. They think they will, or sometimes maybe they go and drive 300 or 400 kilometres in a single day, but most of the time they can get by. So I applaud your strategy on that, and I think it gets people used to that technology. The other big thing about full electrification is that in our latest EV, we have 111 kilowatt hour battery. So that talk about growth strategy. There's so many things. I just started a new business within Volvo, within the same company, which is called Volvo Energy Solutions. And that was driven because we wanted to be able to take our base sales unit of the vehicle itself and then pivot from that. So we now sell fast chargers, we sell home chargers, we sell home storage with batteries. So if you have a solar panel which operates on the DC current, you basically, and the battery works in DC, you basically take a wire, you connect your solar to the battery, you charge your battery. You get that for free, especially if it's sunny. Scotland, we have a problem with that, but in other places in the world, it works quite well. So that's just one example. But now we're into industrial storage, and now we're looking at how can we take a second life for those batteries that are in vehicles at the moment that are going to come back, and how can we then give them a second life as a home storage unit or as an industrial storage unit. So these are all fantastic growth opportunities that are just not available in terms of internal combustion.
Right.
And then finally, vehicle to grid, vehicle to home. So you can plug in now we have bi-directional charging in our EVs. You plug it into your home and you can plug it directly to the grid. We've got 250 people right now in Sweden on a trial, which is directly plugging to the grid. So we're working with one of the big Swedish energy providers. They plug in, they balance the grid at peak times, they get cheap rates, they fill up the batteries during the night time, everybody's happy. And then on that same vehicle, if you do have an outage, you have the opportunity to run your home for at least a few days from the power that's stored within the battery itself. And we're right at the beginning of this.
Right.
I mean, we're not even talking about AI. As soon as we get AI really folded into this, we're going to see a massive explosion of, well, explosion is probably a bad word to use in that sense, but we're going to see a massive acceleration of that technology.
I always say our economy's on fire. People say, don't say that.
Yeah, no, after LA, yeah.
At least
very
after
problematic.
LA, no.
But also this is, speaks to Damilo's point, which is this is the next wave that could really be a leapfrog technology. Let me just, on the same topic of transformation, turn to the governor and Olivier on the issue of supply chains. I know both of you really focused on that. What they say is that for a multinational company, about 80% of your emissions are actually in the supply chain. The third parties that you don't directly control. You've got now supply chain, opportunities and growth going on in the state of Kentucky. What's been your approach to how do we address particularly the small and medium-sized firms that may not have the resources for some of this investment?
Well, I think when you look at energy needs from the private sector, it's three things. It's reliability, it's affordability, and it's sustainability. And if we are all honest, it probably comes in that order for most companies because the lights have to come on and they can't go off. The energy has to be affordable to produce something at a price if you're either supplying or providing to the market. And there is a demand for sustainability that's out there. In the United States right now, we are seeing rapid reshoring. The pandemic taught us. I became governor 3 months before the pandemic. That is not cause and effect. But it taught us that every country needs to be able to make some basic things that they need within that country or within that supply chain. I had to tell nurses and doctors to walk into a COVID wing without the masks or the gloves or the gowns they need. And that's something that ought to teach all of us what we need for our national security. And so in the United States, what we've got right now is a math problem, right? We have a desire to produce more renewable energy as an overall percentage of our production, but we have more demand coming online than ever before. And so as we look at that challenge, I think we also have to be honest about how we're going to get there. And that you can't both bring on all these battery plants and change the means of power production all at the same time. It doesn't work that way. And so we've got to recognize that many traditional means of power production, like we were talking, are going to stay on longer than we might have thought 5 years ago, but that virtually everything new that's going to be built is either going to be renewable or it's going to be the cleanest version of whatever that natural gas plant or other has ever been. And so understanding a little bit of what that timeline is going to be to meet the demands and the fact that we can't get where we want in the planet without the large factories that need the power, that right now need some of that production that we've had for a long time, just tells us the balance of how we have to get there. And I think it's important in these discussions that we talk about the balance. I mean, I remember being on a panel where there's a very large company that said it's not enough to be working towards net zero. We're going to be net zero next year. And I turned afterwards and I said, well, have you thought about the economic impact that will have in certain areas and how much pressure that it will create in different areas? So just understanding that there is balance and nuance in all of this, I think, is critical for it to work, for us to do it right, and for us to get where we want to be as a country in sustainability, both in our products and in our production. So with that said, it's the ultimate OEM's pressure for sustainability on suppliers has been really effective. Each and every one of the suppliers that we have coming into Kentucky is asking us the same things. We were already moving that direction. Thankfully, the last administration did have huge grant programs that are helping us to get there. And the right grant programs both help us increase means of production and ensure that our existing is cleaner as long as it continues to be in production. So I think it was a really good point that for us to be doing right by the planet right now, we've got to look at our existing and how we make it a little bit better or a lot better, as well as everything new and how it comes in. And the final piece I'll mention is innovation, and it's happening every day. We talked before, there's a Scottish company that's come into Kentucky that is going to take the waste from distilling bourbon. I know you're wondering how there could be any waste when distilling bourbon, and turn it into green methane gas that can go through our existing natural gas pipelines. Really elegant, a renewable green gas going through the current infrastructure. And it's those types of innovations as well as that energy savings that are going to get there. But given that there's a tasting, I think on Thursday, just remember, if you're enjoying Kentucky bourbon, you're probably saving the world.
Very good.
So Olivier, you've done so much in thinking about your supply chain as well, and you mentioned digitalization. Maybe you could say just a few words about what that looks like.
No, absolutely, and I'll keep it very short, but if you take a company like us, we've learned very quickly, when you have operation everywhere in the world, the only way to develop your operation sustainably is to do it with a huge network of suppliers. And I will tell you what is our goal at Schneider. If you look at the 4 or 5 big regions where we operate, we try to have 90% of what we sell in this region coming from the region. Okay, so it's through the labor, of course, it's through what we buy from supplier, and for that we need a great network of supplier. You mentioned it. During the COVID just reinforced the business case that you cannot operate sustainably without your supplier. Now, when you combine with your previous question, and you're absolutely right to say, large company who enter in decarbonization realize very quickly that 80% plus, depending on the industry, come from your scope 3. You take a company like Schneider, as of today, we have less than 1% of our CO2 emission that come from scope 1 and 2. So scope 3 is what? It's basically what you buy, what you produce, what you sell to your customer. It's your business. So what we realized 4 years ago, that 80% of our suppliers are SME. 20% look like Schneider, look like Volvo. Those companies, they are big companies. They have resources. They have expert in carbon. They have expert in decarbonization. They have digital platform. They have everything. So to answer your question, we've launched a zero carbon project. It was to embark those 1,000 suppliers, 80% of them being SME, to embark them in the journey, to understand what means decarbonization, realizing a large part is energy consumption, how you keep it simple. Along the way, many of them have discovered that you have more and more regulation, reporting happening everywhere in the world. Reporting on decarbonization is quite complex if you don't know the different framework. So what has taught us, again, we cannot develop sustainability our company without supplier. It's good for them, and we have to make sure every time there is a new wave somewhere, we embark them during that cycle. It's absolutely important. Guess what? 4 years later, we asked them to divide by 2 their CO2 emission by the end of 25. They've reached 80% of their objective. Not bad. And you know what was a surprise for me? 100% of our suppliers have registered to that program. And it was an optional. There was nothing mandatory. We never said to our supplier, if you don't join the program, you're not anymore a supplier of Schneider. So they've done it on a voluntary basis, and we've provided, of course, a lot of support for them throughout the journey. So that's what we need to keep in mind if we want to develop sustainably our industry.
Fantastic. Let's keep maybe transition right now in our last few minutes here to, I think, the area that matters most in moving forward, which is, what does successful collaboration look like? What are the best practices or the strategies that we see for a collaboration between stakeholders here, which we know is the public and private sector. It's also academic, civil society. You all have mentioned a number of places where you think it's worked well. Lessons learned or things you'd like to see us lean into more going forward? Secretary.
Well, I think that the private and public sector partnership is very important to achieve a couple of things. First of all, you mentioned infrastructure. For example, in Mexico, we are aiming at trains the president is very much for trains, and she wants these trains to be electric, which is a great thing. But to achieve that, we need definitely the participation of the private and the public sector to come together. The experience of the private sector on trains is very important for us right now. So so we are engaging in, yes, the government is willing to pull in resources for infrastructure, no question about it. But the trains themselves, if they are going to be electric, it has to be private. And for example, in the Merida, in the Maya train, we are already working with 8 consortiums, 8 private consortiums, which are bringing all their experience in the trains, in the electricity, in la catenaria. How do you all this experience can be built in, because trains were forgotten in Mexico for many years. So now they're coming back. So we're bringing all these experience together. Now the Maya train is already 1,500 kilometers long, and it has been built in 3 years because of this private partnership with the government and 8 consortiums, private consortiums. So that's a very successful example I can bring to them.
3 years for a train line. That's
3 years,
remarkable.
1,500 kilometers.
Yeah. Okay. We're all
Electric train.
excellent. Damilola.
I guess I'll just go back to my government hat again. So one of the things, and I'm from a government that is quite bureaucratic, Nigerian government, and one of the things we did when we wanted to do more decentralized energy was first we brought like 24 of the best Nigerians back to Nigeria. I think investing in local is also very, very important. They were able, including myself, to infiltrate government. It wasn't a foreign face, a foreign name. We spoke the same languages, but we had the best education. So there was a thing to just bring us back to figure out these problems for our country. And there was the other thing that government did was pay us well. Unlike some other people who maybe work in civil service. And I think that's also very important, and that also encouraged us to maybe work a little bit harder. But what I was able to do was that I was able to create from our programs, which is about 550 million to start, and Nigerian government put another 550, so about $1 billion to invest in clean energy for the private sector. I think now you can see there's about 114 African companies that are working in the clean energy space. I'm very proud of the training of young people. We trained over 5,000 young women in STEM who are all still working right now. So that was important. But how we did that, we went to private sector and said, private sector, what do you need? So we wasn't training for training's sake. It wasn't a 3-year course where you need solar and panel installers, we'll do that. Do you need digital integrators, we'll do that. Do you need accounting? And I think that's why that conversation, collaboration is really important. So thank you.
I'm so glad you brought up the topic of talent, because that permeates this whole country. Okay, in the last minutes, maybe Olivier, Jim, and Governor, a minute on this topic.
Well, look, you just heard a couple of examples. I mean, just take the example of Kentucky. I think we're helping each other. You've heard us several times talking about, he talked about Schneider, we talked about Kentucky. That's what we need. We need this kind of dialogue. It's complex. It's very complex to operate in the world of today. You need to have access to electrification. You need to have permits to create more power everywhere. We need the government to make it easier to access to power in some region. We, large corporations, have a responsibility. We operate everywhere in the world. I've given you the example of bring on the supplier, bring on the ecosystem. I mean, we have to do it together. And what I like in the example, and they are not fake examples, I can tell you, we are working in Kentucky end to end. We have a permanent dialogue. We know where to find them. They know where to find us. Absolutely. It's absolutely critical of our success. So let's not oppose one and the other, but let's find a way to dialogue and find solutions together.
Fantastic. Jim?
4 words, 2 have already been mentioned. Talent, today, tomorrow, together. Talent, we get the best talent because they're interested in the new technologies. It allows us to harvest the best brains and get everybody's brain in the game. Today, we got to commit to it. Tomorrow, we got to deliver on those commitments, and we've got to do it together. And so that would be my roundup on where we are as a society and as a technology as we move into the next, for the people who have yet to join us on this planet.
Right. Well, those are things we can all remember. And finally, Governor?
I'm very much in agreement. I think it's communication and trust. as a company or as a trade association, communication with where you want to go, when you need to get there, communication back from the government about where we are and what the plans are, and being able to work in collaboration, understanding the realities that all of us face about how we do the very best that we can in where we're moving to preserve jobs, to be more sustainable, all of those things working in concert. And then I think we can't forget, especially in the United States, we also have nonprofits and foundations that do important work and sometimes can bring in funding pieces. And so how do we open up that conversation sometimes to bring in some of the research that can come from that area, some of the dollars that can come from that area, and sometimes with pre-competitive communication with an entire industry that helps us know where the talent is needed, helps us know how we can use the critical mass between multiple employers to ultimately push in those right directions. But when you've got great employers and they are willing to communicate what they need and where they want to go, you can really move the needle and you can start moving it pretty quickly.
Wow, well, this has been an incredible conversation, I think very dynamic and underscores industrial decarbonization as a growth strategy. So thank you all. Let me also thank the World Economic Forum for elevating this topic and the work of the Center for Advanced Manufacturing and Supply Chains. That is a great organization, part of WEF, and I hope everyone here will work with them. And so please join me in thanking all of our panelists.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
That's right.